The word Hellenes isn't frequently encountered by English speakers when studying the history of Greece and its people. Instead, most authors introduce the historical population of Greece as simply ancient Greeks, or even more simply, Spartans, Athenians, and Macedonians, among other Greeks. Yet the first time a Greek author referred to a united Greek identity in a primary source document, the written word used to describe all Greeks was Hellenes. These ancient Hellenes, we know from Herodotus, shared a common and unique language and culture. There is the bond of the Hellenic race, by which we are of one blood and of one speech, the common temples of the gods and the common sacrifices, the manners of life which are the same for all. On the islands, plains, and valleys of Greece, this cultural unity had existed long before the time of Herodotus. Despite their common Hellenism, these people divided themselves into cultural subdivisions of Dorians, Ionians, Aeolians, and Achaeans. Each subculture expressed their brand of Hellenism differently, with an emphasis on different cultural values. The two most famous being the Dorians, known for their austerity and militarism through states like Sparta, and the Ionians for their philosophy, trade, poetry, and other arts through the Athenians. The Spartans of their time called their city Lacedaemon and referred to each other as Lacedaemonioi. Through the famous Lycurgian institutions like the Agoge, the Lacedaemonioi produced warriors that could truly claim to be masters of war, even though the polis itself never exceeded 45,000 or so inhabitants, and the male body of politically equal Lacedaemonian men that comprised their hoplite army most likely never exceeded 9,000. Conversely, the Athenians, through leading into their democracy, naval power, and trade, were able to create a true metropolis in Athens, with a population well into the hundreds of thousands. Although focusing more on trade and arts, Athens still produced a large and robust citizen hoplite army with an assortment of reserve, mercenary, and supplementary regiments. As for the Achaeans, the ethnic, linguistic, and cultural labels attached to the people of Achaea and Arcadia can quickly get murky, as the northern Achaeans had some linguistic and cultural influence from the Dorians. However, both peoples are united in their common descent from the Mycenaean Greek tribes, most famous for their participation in the Trojan War. Among the Aeolians were the Thessalians, famous for being one of the few Greeks to produce a competent cavalry, and the Thebans, famous for their own military daring and innovation under people like Epaminondas and Pelopidas. Not only did Athenians and Lacedaemonians display legendary martial prowess throughout Europe, Asia, and Africa, but the rest of the Greek cities, despite lacking the resources of Athens and Sparta, still produced warriors that the international world considered to be second to no other culture during their time. For all of the progress and beauty produced by the ancient Hellenic culture, up until the 5th century before Christ, it could be argued that the region was a civilizational backwater compared to the Persian Empire. The Achaemenids governed tens of millions of diverse subjects across 3 continents. Meanwhile, the most influential Hellenic polis, Athens, barely exerted influence across the Aegean. It's even more impressive then that when the Hellenes and Achaemenids finally clashed, the Greeks won almost every major engagement against the Persians, and eventually even conquered the Persian Empire outright through Alexander's conquests. So how did ancient Greek society produce warriors able to overcome the greatest empire of their time with comparatively little resources? The very short answer is geography. Large and conventional pitched battles generally take place throughout the entire urbanized world throughout all eras. It just so happens that during the time and geopolitical sphere of the ancient Hellenes, no culture produced a more heavily armored and disciplined heavy infantry that fought in a dense formation than the Hellenes. One of the main reasons for this being that no other culture developed in a geographic region that forced military engagements between separate urban entities in such extremely restricted terrain. That is to say, There were many Greek cities, and in their evolution of fighting, the pervasive mountains and seas forced fighting to take place in routine and predictable passes, where the most advantageous formation was a dense and heavy one. Conversely, contemporary cultures often developed in topography more open and easily traversed. Accordingly, formations and tactics were adapted to be looser, more agile, and with a greater focus on mobility, light troop types, and irregular warfare. One example of this is the northern neighbors and distant cousins of the ancient Greeks, the Thracians, who fully leaned into this by embracing mobility-based irregular warfare. Another example would be the Persians themselves, who embraced a combined arms approach based on mobility, versatility, and then strength of arms. As a result of their geography, almost all ancient Hellenic cities produced hoplite armies with exceptional capabilities in pitched battle. Since these cities were fairly rich for the era, these citizen hoplite armies further leaned into their heaviness by wearing full bronze armor sets in addition to large circular bronze-plated shields. This alone could have made ancient Greeks a dominant military force in their time. However, these hoplites were often combined with effective leadership, making them an unstoppable force on the international scene. This isn't that surprising, considering it's almost impossible for an army comprised entirely of light troop types to overcome one with heavy infantry and/or cavalry. Therefore, as long as the Hellenes practiced good judgment, they could overcome almost any foreign odds despite their small numbers. The Spartans, despite their even smaller numbers, were the only ones who produced a professional hoplite army with state-sponsored arms and drilling. Still, the high military leadership capable of good decision-making often associated with professional armies was not restricted to Sparta. Many of the Greek city-states created exceptional armies capable of great deeds. It was 10,000 Athenians and Plataeans who alone granted the Persian Empire a massive defeat at the Battle of Marathon, when they defeated a landing force which included thousands of Persian infantry in addition to cavalry and auxiliaries that may have numbered up to 100,000. The Athenians did this by fully leveraging their entire force in a field-wide charge. Athenian leaders Miltiades, Aristides, and Themistocles showed effective military acumen, and more importantly, that it existed among non-Spartan Greeks. It's also important to note that these were heroic societies where leaders led from the front. At Marathon, for example, several of the Athenian captains and generals died leading the outnumbered charge into the Persian line. So despite the wealth and trappings of settled societies, the Hellenes were for all intents and purposes just as heroic and rugged as the best warriors of any tribal society. Later, when it mattered most, the Hellenes, despite their internal rivalries, did consciously unite against Xerxes and the Achaemenid Empire in order to preserve their kind. Despite living safely past the Isthmus of Corinth in the Herodotus Valley, the Spartans ventured out of the Peloponnese to lead the rest of the Greeks in war against the Persians. Leonidas, the Spartan Aegeid king, even died as a premeditated rearguard to a united Hellenic force, and successfully galvanized the rest of the Greeks during the defense of Greece. Ultimately, the Lacedaemonians led the Greeks at Plataea in victory over the invaders, while the Athenians repelled the Persians in the seas. In my opinion, the entire defense of Greece by a handful of Hellenic city-states against the largest force in the world is one of the most epic and legendary stories in all of human history. The Athenians refused to surrender despite the sacking of their city and eventually even destroyed the Persian fleet. The Spartans, despite the safety of their geography, their small numbers, and even the loss of their king, still ventured north with 5,000 of their citizen hoplites to defeat the Persians, fully cementing their place in history as legends. And maybe most importantly, the rest of the Greeks also rose up during this conflict, and despite not having such magnificent institutions as Athens or Sparta, still united against Earth's largest empire, and as a byproduct planted the seeds for the modern Greek identity. The final aspect of ancient Greek society, not usually connected to war, yet in my opinion extremely relevant to the subject area, was the Greek mysteries. I don't think it's a coincidence that Greek society produced a very glorious era of history during a time when the mysteries were active and attracted crowds of Greeks on a perennial basis. The crowds and initiates, at least for some of the mystery schools, were inclusive to women, fully permeating the effects of the mystery schools into larger Greek society. When I say mysteries, I am referring more specifically to the several distinct practices where Greeks usually performed rituals in combination with ingesting vaguely understood substances. Some of the different mysteries were the Eleusinian mysteries, the Orphic mysteries, the Dionysian mysteries, and the Samothracian mysteries, among others. At the Eleusinian mysteries, many Athenians visited Eleusis and ingested something known as kaikeon, which was made from barley, water, pennyroyal, which is a herb similar to mint, and later variants sometimes included wine in the recipe as well. It's speculated that the preparation of this cocktail was done in a manner which produced a psychoactive fungus during the fermentation process, which would have made the kaikeon have properties associated with a typical psychedelic substance. Historically, there are speculations that this has occurred several times throughout history in an accidental manner, with late medieval and early modern Europeans accidentally creating what's believed to be a psychedelic fungus known as ergot during the fermentation of grains like barley. The effects associated with undergoing such an experience at least once often have to do with a significant expansion of consciousness, and the popular Western concept of ego death may have been a part of many Greek initiates' experience. Both Pausanias and Plutarch attest to the widely popular nature of these festivals and the perennial crowds attracted to them. I believe the mystery schools had a massive and overlooked effect on Greek culture, one that had a positive impact on all facets of ancient Greek life, without excluding the Greek warriors that defended their home country.